Book 3. Chapter 1. A Sword Passes. Balin Stonehammer awoke to the sound of crashing waves. His body sprawled across the wet sand like driftwood abandoned by the tide. Salt crusted his beard, and his muscles screamed in protest as he forced himself to sit upright. The stormy sky above had darkened to a brooding twilight. Hours had clearly passed since he'd been swept from the lighthouse cliffs. The dwarf spat seawater and gathered his scattered belongings, mumbling curses in Dwarvish as he inventoried what remained. His waterlogged pack, his glaive, miraculously still strapped to his back, and his sodden clothes. The giant rune carved into his breastplate had saved him, he reckoned, its ancient magic preserving him when the sea would have claimed another. He climbed the rocky shoreline with the deliberate patience that was his hallmark, each step measured against the howling wind and stinging rain. Lightning flashed across the distant horizon, illuminating the silhouette of the lighthouse far along the coast.
"Better see if they made it,"
he grunted to himself, though his practical mind was already calculating the likelihood of survival. Morthal had been carried off the cliff, and Balin knew what lay below. From the shelter of a jagged outcropping, Balin observed the lighthouse grounds. In the failing light, he could make out a winged shape, harpy, dragging something from the churning sea onto the beach below. Something large, something man-shaped. Balin's fingers tightened around his glaive handle. For a moment, duty pulled him toward the lighthouse, toward whatever remained of his companions. But the pragmatic voice that had kept him alive for decades whispered caution. Alone, injured, against harpies. The odds were poor.
"Can't help the dead by joining them,"
he murmured, his voice lost to the wind. With a final glance toward the lighthouse, Balin turned south. The procession entered Phandalin with the leaden weight of defeat hanging over it. Rain drizzled from a gray sky, as if the heavens themselves mourned. Townsfolk emerged from shops and homes, conversations dying on their lips as they witnessed the grim parade. Morthal's body lay wrapped in oilcloth on a simple wagon, his sword placed atop the shroud. Zira, Doreen, and Elara walked alongside, their faces etched with exhaustion and grief. None had spoken more than a few words since finding Morthal's broken body washed upon the jagged shoreline.
"What happened?"
called a voice from the gathering crowd.
"Is that Morthal?"
gasped another. Townsfolk pressed forward, their faces registering shock and disbelief. The cleric of Helm had made an impression in his short time in Phandalin. His stern righteousness and unwavering duty had provided a sense of security in uncertain times. Doreen stepped forward, her normal bravado subdued.
"We'll explain everything. There'll be a proper funeral. But for now, let us pass."
The crowd parted reluctantly, murmurs of shock rippling outward as the news spread. Zira barely registered any of it. Her vision had tunneled to a singular purpose. Find Garaele. Find comfort. Find understanding. The weight of everything, the lighthouse, the harpies, Morthal's fall, his broken body on the rocks, threatened to crush her completely. She broke away from the procession without a word, leaving Doreen to manage the barrage of questions. Her feet carried her through familiar streets toward the small shrine where Garaele might be found. Behind her, Elara's footsteps fade in another direction, toward the Stonehill Inn. At the inn, Elara found no welcome. The innkeeper stood with arms crossed, blocking the stairway.
"Not again,"
she said, her voice firm despite the tremor of fear in it.
"I've had enough. Those markings all over the walls and floor. The other guests complained about the chanting all night."
"I must prepare,"
Elara whispered, his gaze unfocused, drifting past her as if seeing something.
"Prepare elsewhere,"
she replied, not unkindly, but with finality.
"I'm sorry about Morthal, truly, but I can't have you scaring off my customers with your ways. Find other lodging.
Ilara stood frozen for a moment, then turned without protest and walked back into the rain. Garael's cottage stood at the edge of town, small but neat, with herbs growing under the eaves. Zira practically collapsed through the door, her composure shattering the moment she saw Garael's concerned face.
It's Morthal.
She gasped as Garael's arms encircled her.
He's dead.
The words seemed to drain the last of her strength. Zira's legs gave way and she sank to her knees, Garael kneeling with her, holding her close as the sobs racked her body.
The harpies, they sang, and they carried him right off the cliff. We couldn't help him. We found him on the rocks below.
Her words dissolved into incoherent grief.
Shh.
Garaele whispered, stroking Zira's hair.
I'm here. I'm here now.
Later, after Zira had exhausted herself with weeping, Garaele guided her to bed.
Rest,
She said firmly.
everything else can wait.
Zira lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep remained elusive in the days that followed. She would close her eyes only to see Morthal's broken form on the rocks, or worse, imagine his last moments as he plummeted from the cliff. When exhaustion finally claimed her, nightmares jolted her awake again. Garael was her anchor. She brought food, insisted Zira eat, and sat with her in silence when words seemed inadequate. On the second day, she arrived with unexpected news.
Balin has returned.
She said, her voice carefully measured to sound casual, though relief shone in her eyes.
He arrived at dawn. He's at the inn.
Zira sat up immediately.
He's alive?
The first spark of hope in days flickered in her chest.
Very much so. Washed up far down the coast from what I hear.
Within the hour, Zira found herself at the Stonehill Inn, face to face with the stoic dwarf. Balin looked remarkably unaffected by his ordeal. His beard was combed, his armor repaired, as if he'd merely returned from a day's hunting rather than surviving a near drowning.
We thought you were dead.
Zira said, her voice catching.
We should have searched longer for you. I'm sorry.
Balin shrugged, his expression inscrutable beneath his thick beard.
No sense looking for a drowned dwarf in a storm. You did what you had to.
His practicality was both jarring and oddly comforting. Some things at least remained unchanged. They were interrupted by Sildar Hallwinter, who approached with a grim nod.
Zira. Balin. I've made arrangements for Morthal's funeral. 4 days from now. The proper observances for a servant of Helm.
His voice was professional, but strain showed around his eyes.
He was a good man. One of the best.
Zira nodded numbly and excused herself. She needed mourning clothes, something appropriate to honor Morthal. Everything she owned suddenly seemed too bright, too frivolous for the occasion. The days passed in a haze. Zira rarely left Garael's house, drifting between sleep and wakefulness, between grief and numbness. Occasionally she would catch snippets of gossip about Ilara. Townspeople claimed to have seen a ragged figure slipping through shadows at night, searching through refuse heaps for food. She thought of seeking him out, but couldn't summon the energy. What comfort could she offer when she herself felt so hollow? Balin retreated to the blacksmith's forge. The rhythmic ring of hammer on metal could be heard at all hours, a meditation in iron, speaking more clearly than words ever could for the taciturn dwarf. Only Doreen seemed to thrive in the aftermath of tragedy. She moved through town with purpose, conferring with Halia at the Miners' Exchange, speaking with the former Redbrands who now served as town guards, planning, preparing, as if Morthal's death were merely an inconvenience to be overcome, not a wound that had torn their fragile group apart. At one such meeting, Halia paced her office, clearly displeased.
This complicates matters.
she said, pouring a measure of amber liquid for Doreen.
Morthal was becoming manageable.
Manageable?
Doreen raised an eyebrow, accepting the drink.
You were making progress with him.
Halia's smile was thin.
He was starting to trust you despite your differences of opinion. That was valuable.
Doreen snorted.
Valuable to who? He was rigid as iron and twice as cold.
To us. To the Gentarim.
Halia leaned forward over her desk.
A Lord's Alliance agent with divided loyalties would have been an exceptional asset. Now we must adapt.
She stared into the distance for a moment, calculating.
Sildar has sent word to Neverwinter. Someone will come to replace Morthal to continue his work. I've heard whispers. A paladin, perhaps.
Another holy warrior?
Doreen groaned.
Wonderful.
This one serves Hor, not Helm.
Halia's eyes glinted.
The god of retribution is pragmatic in ways Helm never was. Get close to this newcomer, Doreen. The group must stay intact. Your mission remains the same. Find Wave Echo Cave. Secure its riches for our network.
Doreen nodded, downing her drink.
And Alara? The elf is losing what little mind he had left.
A broken tool can still serve a purpose.
Halia replied coldly.
Or be discarded when no longer useful.
The day of the funeral arrived with appropriate solemnity. Dark clouds rolling in from the sea, bringing wind and intermittent rain. The entire town gathered at the small cemetery on the hillside, where a fresh grave had been prepared. Sildar officiated, speaking of duty and sacrifice. The townspeople who had known Morthal, however briefly, offered their remembrances. Zira stood stone-faced throughout, clutching Gareli's hand like a lifeline, her other hand holding a spray of white flowers to place on the grave. Ilara appeared shortly before the service ended, wild-eyed and disheveled, his clothes caked with mud and forest debris. He stood apart from the mourners, watching with the wary gaze of a feral animal. When the coffin was lowered, he approached the grave, placed something small upon it, a carved wooden token, then melted back into the trees before anyone could speak to him. Just as the final prayers were being offered, a tall figure in gleaming armor appeared at the edge of the gathering. His sudden presence drew all eyes, a man with the stern, weathered face of a veteran soldier, a paladin's tabard bearing the symbol of Hor, the god of retribution, hung over his mail. As the service concluded, the crowd began to drift away, many heading toward the inn where food and drink had been prepared for the memorial gathering. Zira found herself walking beside the newcomer, his armored presence both comforting and intimidating.
You served with Morthal?
She asked, her voice hoarse from unshed tears. Karma nodded once.
In another life.
The Stonehill Inn was crowded but subdued, the normal boisterous atmosphere replaced by the quiet murmur of respectful conversation. Zira sat at a table with Doreen, Garael, and Karma, the four of them forming an island of awkward silence amid the gentle hum of the memorial gathering. Doreen broke the tension by signaling the barmaid for wine.
To Morthal,
she said when the glasses arrived, raising hers in a toast.
who never wavered.
They drank, and Doreen made sure Zira's glass was refilled immediately. Garaele shot Doreen a disapproving look, but remained silent as Zira drank again, welcoming the numbing effect of the alcohol.
How did you know him?
Zira finally asked Karma, her voice slightly slurred. The wine had loosened her tongue, pushing past the intimidation she felt in the paladin's presence. Karma regarded her with steady eyes.
We served together in Baldur's Gate. My company was destroyed in an incident where many died.
His words were measured, revealing little emotion.
Morthal was blamed. For years I believed it.
And now?
Garaela prompted when he fell silent.
New evidence has come to light.
Karma's jaw tightened.
The truth is more complex than I once believed.
As the evening wore on and the wine continued to flow, encouraged by Doreen despite Garael's growing concern, Zyra's reserve crumbled entirely. She found herself recounting their entire journey to the solemn paladin, from the goblin ambush to the Red Brand hideout, from Glasstaff's execution to the Walking Dead at Old Owl Well, and finally, haltingly, the tragedy at the lighthouse.
We should have saved him.
She concluded, her voice breaking.
If we'd been stronger.
She trailed off, tears spilling down her cheeks. At one point, seized by a sudden wild impulse, Zira stumbled outside, calling Elara's name into the rainy darkness.
Elara, come back! We need you!
The wind snatched her words away, and Karma gently guided her back inside, his hand steady on her elbow. Throughout it all, the paladin listened with unwavering attention, his face betraying little beyond a deepening gravity. When Zira finally fell silent, emotionally spent, he simply nodded.
Rest,
he said, the single word carrying the weight of a command.
Tomorrow, there is work to be done.
The following morning, Sildar summoned Karma to the townmaster's hall. He looked exhausted, the loss of his colleague clearly weighing heavily on him.
I assume you will continue Morthal's work,
Sildar said without preamble.
The Lord's Alliance needs someone to lead that group.
Karma stood at parade rest, his posture perfect.
I serve both Hor and the Alliance.
The mission remains vital, regardless of which deity guides your hand,
Sildar countered.
Gundren Rockseeker must be found. The goblin stronghold at Cragmaw Castle must be located, and Wave Echo Cave must be secured before the Black Spider's agents claim it.
He sighed, rubbing his temples.
Let me tell you about the people you'll be working with. Elara Morningvale, a swordsman of considerable skill but questionable sanity. He's become increasingly unstable, talking to himself, obsessed with protecting Zira.
Sildar's expression darkened.
Last night, he was spotted digging through garbage behind the butcher's shop, like an animal.
He continued,
Zyra Darkmire, a sorceress playing at power. She's got talent, but like most women, she's ruled by her feelings and prone to hysteria. This is men's work, truth be told. Still, she's obedient enough, which is more than I expect from her kind.
Karma's expression remained neutral as Sildar continued.
Balin Stonehammer, dwarf warrior, keeps to himself, solid in a fight when he shows up. He is your best asset. And Doreen, competent scout and fighter, but I suspect she has her own agenda.
The door opened before Sildar could continue, admitting Harbin Wester, the townmaster. The portly official hurried forward, hand extended.
Paladin, welcome to Phandalin,
he effused, pumping Karma's hand vigorously.
Such a tragedy about Morthal, simply dreadful, but we must press forward, mustn't we? The town's prosperity depends on it.
He lowered his voice conspiratorially.
About the lighthouse matter, I've raised the bounty to 300 gold pieces for clearing out those wretched creatures. Most urgent, you understand. Most urgent indeed.
His manner was strange, almost feverish.
Why the urgency?
Karma asked, his gaze penetrating. Harbin's smile faltered momentarily.
Why, for commerce, of course. Ships avoid our coast entirely now. Bad for business, very bad.
He recovered quickly, his smile returning.
And when you've dealt with that, there's the Wave Echo Cave business. Once reopened, Phandalin will become the jewel of the Sword Coast. Mark my words, there'll be a statue in the town square. Of me, of course, commemorating the golden age I ushered in.
Sildar's expression suggested this was not the first time he'd heard this particular speech. Zyra awoke in Garaele's cottage, her head pounding with the consequences of too much wine. Fragments of the previous night returned to her, her tearful narrative to Karma, her impulsive rush into the rain calling for Elara, her gradual collapse into grief and wine-soaked memories.
By all the gods,
she groaned, pressing her palms against her temples.
I've made a complete fool of myself.
Garayele appeared with a steaming cup of herbal tea.
You were mourning.
She said simply, sitting beside Zira on the bed.
There's no shame in grief.
I babbled like an idiot to Carmaral,
Zira lamented.
Morthal's brother-in-arms. Someone I should have impressed. Not wept all over like a child.
Garael's hand found Zira's, squeezing gently.
You showed him that Morthal was valued, mourned, loved even in your way. That's not embarrassment, it's honor.
Zira wasn't convinced, but the gentle understanding in Garaele's eyes soothed her nonetheless. They sat in comfortable silence and exchanged a few kisses as the tea's bitter herbs gradually eased her headache. At the Stonehill Inn, Doreen had just finished her morning meal when Halia slipped into the seat across from her.
Well,
Halia prompted without preamble.
your impressions of the paladin?
Doreen shrugged.
Hard to say. Grim, humorless, probably just as righteous as Morthal, but serving a vengeful god might make him more flexible.
One can hope.
Halia leaned closer.
Be wary of Garael. She's more perceptive than most, and it seems Zira confides everything in her.
Her lips thinned with annoyance.
Including, apparently, the details of your little war party. The paladin seems to have taken an interest in our sorceress.
What kind of interest?
Doreen smirked.
The kind that men usually reserve for poetry and poor decisions.
Halia continued.
Men are such fools. One tear from a damsel in distress, and they're falling over themselves to help her.
She stood.
Keep the group together, Doreen, and keep me informed.
The next day, Zira finally gathered her courage. She couldn't avoid Karma forever. Her initial plan was simply to apologize for her behavior at the memorial. But first, she needed armor. The dresses she had ordered from Neverwinter weeks ago had finally arrived. She selected the finest, a deep blue that complemented her complexion. She spent an hour on her appearance, cleaning her boots until they gleamed, carefully combing and arranging her hair, applying a touch of perfume and the subtle makeup she'd learned to use in her days in Neverwinter. The effect was transformative, not just physically, but within herself. The familiar ritual of beautification restored a sense of control, of competence. She was Zira Darkmire, accomplished sorceress, not a weeping little girl. She found Karma at the town hall, reviewing maps with Sildar. The paladin looked up as she entered, his stern gaze faltering for just a heartbeat as it swept over her carefully arranged appearance. Something dark flickered in his eyes, a complicated emotion quickly mastered and buried beneath layers of practiced discipline.
Good day, Miss Darkmire,
he said, his voice deliberately controlled, almost too formal. His knuckles whitened slightly where they gripped the edge of the map table.
I wanted to apologize for my behavior last night,
she began, her prepared speech already dissolving in the face of his impassive stare.
I wasn't myself, and I rambled on terribly, and—
Enough.
Karma interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind.
Gather yourself, Zira Darkmire. Morthal is dead. Grief serves its purpose, but now there is work to do.
He regarded her steadily.
You must help me to gather the others.
The command in his voice awakened something beneath her grief, a need for direction when her own compass had failed her. She straightened almost imperceptibly, her posture shifting in subtle response to his authority before she even formed the conscious thought to agree.
Yes, I can do that.
They found Doreen first, at the attic room of Miners' Exchange. The rogue was cleaning her daggers, her expression guarded as they entered.
So,
she said, eyes flicking between Zira and Karma.
You're the new boss, eh?
I am here to finish what Morthal started,
Karma replied evenly. Doreen seemed to consider this, then reached behind her and withdrew a familiar longsword in its scabbard. Morthal's blade.
Guess you should have this then.
She extended it toward Karma.
War Brother's privilege and all that.
Zira gasped softly. The sword, Talon, had been a point of contention when Morthal had claimed it. To see Doreen surrender it so readily was unexpected.
It's right.
Zira found herself saying.
Morthal would want you to have it.
Karma accepted the blade with a solemn nod, examining it briefly before strapping it alongside his own.
We leave tomorrow at dawn. Be ready.
Doreen rolled her eyes.
Just like Morthal, all business.
But she nodded agreement. Balin was next, found predictably at the smithy. The dwarf listened to their plans with his usual stoicism, nodded once, and said simply,
I'll be there.
Elara proved more elusive. Despite searching the town and even questioning Doreen's secret network of former Red Brands, now serving as town guards, they found only rumors of the troubled elf.
He's watching Zira.
Doreen eventually concluded with a shrug.
Thinks she's his dead sister or something. He won't let you out of his sight even if we can't see him.
So he'll follow,
Karma stated.
Like a shadow.
Doreen confirmed.
Creepy, but sometimes useful in a fight.
That evening, Zira returned to Garaele's cottage for a final night before their departure. They sat by the fire, hands intertwined, speaking in low voices of what might come.
I don't trust Harbin's sudden interest in the lighthouse,
Garael confessed.
300 gold is an unusual sum for him to part with in the best of circumstances.
Perhaps he truly is concerned for commerce.
Zira suggested, though her tone revealed her own skepticism.
Perhaps.
Garael's thumb traced small circles on Zyra's palm.
And this paladin of Hor. Be careful, Zira. Retribution is a double-edged sword.
What do you mean?
The god he serves, Hor, demands balance. An eye for an eye. No more, no less.
Garaele's eyes reflected the firelight.
Those who follow him are instruments of poetic justice, not mercy.
They spoke of gentler things after that, of what they'd do when Zyra returned, of tentative plans and tender possibilities. When the hour grew late, they shared a kiss that held both promise and fear, neither acknowledging the dangerous path that lay ahead. The next morning dawned clear and cool. The small party assembled at the eastern edge of town, the wagon loaded with supplies. Karma led them out without ceremony, his posture rigid and his gaze fixed on the road ahead. The first day of travel passed uneventfully. They made camp as darkness fell, the routine of setting watches and preparing meals achingly familiar, yet strangely hollow without Morthal's steady presence. On the second day, they passed the spot where their journey had begun, where goblins had ambushed them and Gundren Rockseeker had been taken, setting them on the path that had led to so much danger and loss. Zyra stared at the small clearing as they passed, remembering Morthal as he had been that day, stern, righteous, utterly certain of his path. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away, determined to maintain her composure. That night, after the others had retired to their bedrolls, Zira approached Karma where he sat keeping watch, his profile sharp against the dying firelight.
I have something for you,
she said softly, drawing a small object wrapped in a handkerchief from her pocket.
Something that is too heavy for me to carry.
She unwrapped the cloth, revealing a small amulet, a 5-headed dragon rendered in tarnished silver.
We found it at Old Owl Well, on the Red Wizard's body. I've never held anything that felt so wrong.
She shuddered slightly.
It's connected to the cult of Tiamat.
Karma extended his hand, and Zira placed the amulet in his palm, careful not to touch the metal itself.
There is evil here,
Karma confirmed, his eyes narrowing as he examined the symbol.
Old evil, patient evil.
He rewrapped the amulet carefully.
You were wise to bring this to me.
Will you destroy it?
Karma considered the bundle in his hand.
Not yet. It may lead us to those who would use it.
His eyes met hers, their intensity unwavering.
Tell me everything you remember about the Red Wizard and his plans.
And so, beneath the canopy of stars, Zero once again found herself recounting their journey. But this time with clarity and purpose, the details sharp and relevant. The ghost of Morthal seemed to hover at the edge of her awareness, but as she spoke, she felt a subtle shift within herself, from grief toward resolve, from loss toward purpose. The campfire burned low as they talked, casting long shadows across the clearing. In the darkness beyond, unseen, a figure watched, eyes gleaming with an unnatural light, a doll's head clutched in skeletal fingers, lips moving in silent prayer to a sister long dead.
Creiden, lysgyntan, yn y ffin yn gweithio sbryn o'r gorwydd tan.